everyone, this is Jessica Pettitt, and who do I have the pleasure of interviewing today?
I'm Devin Thorpe. You got to that very fast, very quickly. I'm so excited. So I call myself a champion of social good, and I write and speak and think about solving the world's big problems of extreme poverty, climate change, and global health. So that's who I am.
I am so excited to get to chat with you today. While we were talking right before we hit record, evidently we are both secretly stalking one another, and we should probably just bring that out into the public, don't you think?
That's right. You are amazing, Jess. And
Well,
I know you are just revered in speaking circles because of your tremendous work and work ethic. And so, yes, I have admired you for a long time.
well, thank you very much. My New Year's resolution is to accept compliments, at least better. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited to bring, and we'll get to this in just a second, but to bring the corporate social responsibility piece of the conversation into these interviews, because it's usually a connection that people don't want to make, right? So before we get there, though, foreshadowing, I want to start off with two kind of broad topic. There's no wrong answer, but these things are just rattling around my head. And specifically because I am fangirling so hard right now, I cannot wait to see what your take on them are. So the first one is the concept of diversity dividend. So this first kind of showed up in my universe when people were talking about questioning what is the ROI on diversity and inclusion work. So thinking about investment, action, and return, what does diversity dividend mean to you?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is an experience working for a very large, successful organization that I would argue wasn't adequately diverse, and that business ultimately failed. And I think what's going on in part, and it's only part of the equation in this company's example, but what's going on today is diversity is becoming so essential in the workplace that those companies that don't adopt diversity are now out of the mainstream, and it literally puts their survival at risk, right? Because we've been talking about diversity formally for decades, right? I remember hearing my first diversity speech at Cornell University almost 30 years ago. It would be 27 years ago. And yeah, so what's happened is it's been fully institutionalized in large companies and increasingly in small and mid-sized companies. So if you are not adopting really authentic, genuine diversity programs and initiatives, it means you are at risk of extinction because the diverse teams do better, period, end of story.
Yeah. Well, and that leads to another big concept question, which is kind of the underbelly of that. And that is asterisks other duties assigned. So this sometimes is the last line of a job description, but it also goes to the kind of unrecognized work that often we kind of do on our own to be able to make a sense of community in a workplace, or we're kind of the unofficial president of an affinity group. What does other duties assigned mean to you?
Well, when I think about that, I think about companies that have adopted great, super flexible programs and policies for their employees. Like I recently interviewed one of the senior top execs at Salesforce. I wasn't planning to talk about her, and so her name is skipping my mind. Because Suzanne DiBianco is her name, and she'll be mad at me for forgetting her name there for a minute. But
we can edit that out.
she's one of many of her ilk of senior leaders of companies who in Silicon Valley and around the country, around the world, who are beginning to look at trying to create flexible ways for employees to engage in community service. And so, some of these models allow for employees to devote time, company time, to community service. And so sometimes that takes the shape of just going down to the homeless shelter and, serving a meal, and doing that, once a week or once a month all year. And the company's paying for them to do that. In other cases, it's someone planning an activity where they might take a number of coworkers for an entire day to go do some sort of community service. One big bank, Zions Bank, big bank in Utah, has literally every employee go out and do community service on one day every year. So every employee. So it's a company-wide thing on a work day. And so there are lots of different ways to come at this, but there is just such great evidence that this idea of getting employees to engage in some form of community service makes them happier, that it is almost unequivocal. So in terms of building a successful culture, that community service element is really, really important. And there's even some evidence from the people I've talked to, did a little survey, that managers are seeing that they end up with better employees. And they measure this or come to this conclusion as a result of their ability to recruit better people and their ability to develop people better because of having some sort of corporate social responsibility program.
So between community service and corporate social responsibility, part of what I value so much about your work is that you don't address the three elephants in the room as kind of the last 15 minutes of the program or as a casual example, but that you head on between corporate social responsibility and the positive impacts of community service, address extreme poverty, global health, climate change, many more, but those three in particular seem to be the ones that most people are scared of. In prepping for these interviews, when I've had conversations, it's really fascinating to me that when I ask, like, what topics do you like to avoid? LGBT issues, trans issues specifically. For me, it is really understanding immigration, refugee laws and realities, lived experiences, and the environment. I married an environmental ethicist, so I didn't even know what I didn't know until I got married. But that's where you live. That's exactly where you swim. Can you just talk a little bit, and by a little bit, I mean forever, about what your work is, what you do, why did you pick those topics, and why is that so imperative to be your lead and not an add-in kind of afterwards?
Well, I think we all have a desire for our work to matter. It's an inherent part of the human psyche. And I really feel bad for people who find their work doesn't matter. And I know those people are out there. There's, again, good data on this to suggest that, a significant minority of employees are completely disengaged and unhappy. And they're just not finding meaning and purpose in what they're doing. And it's so important for employers to find ways to engage them. Well, for me, when I launched into this work 7 years ago or 8 years ago, I would talk about a broader mission of wanting to help solve all the world's big problems. And then people would say to me, well, what are the world's big problems? And I thought, well, duh, it's extreme poverty, it's global health, and it's climate change. Those are the world's big problems. And so that's how I evolved into this discussion. And I realized those really are big problems. They're broad topics. But there are some exciting things. Extreme poverty, there is a global consensus that we can completely eliminate extreme poverty by 2030 globally. That is an amazing thing to think about. And I want to put this into a little bit of context. When I was born in 1965, It's a little bit apples and oranges. The people who count these things today weren't counting them then, but about 60% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. 6 out of every 10 did not know where they were going to get water and food, how they were going to survive the next 24 hours. Now, today, there are still 700 million people living in that condition. It's horrible. It's tragic, horrific. But it's less than 10% of the world's population.
Wow.
Less than 10%. The progress is incredible. And the forecast continues to be really quite bright on that topic. We are making great progress. Now, I think 2030 is an aspirational challenge goal. And I don't want to sound like I'm too skeptical, but I think we will still have work to do after 2030. And clearly, once we have eradicated extreme poverty, and that's defined by the World Bank as people living on less than $1.90 a day. There are other ways to think about it, but there are a lot more people who are living without clean water and sanitation. Mm-hmm. And so when we broaden the definition just a little bit, we bring in another nearly 2 billion people, another 1.5 billion people into that circle. And so there's a lot of work for us to do in fighting extreme poverty and those conditions. Of course, that's directly related to communicable diseases, mm-hmm. especially. And it's just tragic to think about the number of people who are dying today from AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. But 30 years ago, there were 350,000 cases of polio every year around the world. Now, it's been a long time since people got polio in the United States and Western Europe. But people are still getting polio today, right now. But last year, to put this into clarity, there were 32 cases, not 3,200, not 32,000, not 32 million, 32 wow. cases of polio. Over the next 30 years, we can do exactly the same thing for all communicable diseases. There is no reason on earth anyone should be getting sick with AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, or virtually any other communicable disease, at least not in any numbers that we would think of as a public health concern. Those diseases should be very, very rare, if not completely eradicated. And polio is proof we can do it. Mm-hmm. All the diseases are different. Obviously polio spreads through a different mechanism than malaria, but that doesn't mean we can't, or AIDS or TB, but that doesn't mean we can't stop them. There are clear paths for stopping all of these diseases. In all cases, we need money and political will to bring it about. Mm-hmm. Also on the public health front, it is so exciting to see what's going on in the field of cancer. And I'm convinced in 30 years, there will still be cancer, right? People will still get cancer on occasion, but it will be very rare that people die of cancer. A year ago this week, my father died of pancreatic cancer. He was diagnosed and died 5 days later. That will still happen. It will be less often, but that I imagine will still happen, where people don't know they're sick and then are diagnosed and die. But people who catch it in time and will catch more of it in time, they will be cured. There is incredible, unbelievable stuff going on in the field of organ regeneration. It sounds science fiction, but it's entirely likely that within the next 30 years, when we get old, we will go in for treatment to regenerate our hearts, to regenerate our kidneys, to regenerate our liver. and we'll be able to live, we'll be able to survive all kinds of diseases. We'll be able to keep on going and live healthy, energetic lives well past 80. You and I, our children will take it for granted that, of course, we live to 100. That's what happens. Our grandchildren will have, our grandparents didn't think they could live to 100. The world is really going to be different. And then finally, we talk about climate change. The trends on climate change are not great. We're still tending to use more fossil fuels and release more carbon into the atmosphere as our global economy grows. Mm-hmm. And we have to break that trend. I think in 2016, the global economy grew and we reduced carbon emissions. But in 2017, we increased again, along with the economy. So we've got to break that connection and separate economic growth from increasing carbon emissions. We've got to stop using fossil fuels. But there is a great book and website. You don't need to read the book and get it. It's called Drawdown. Projectdrawdown.org is the website. They have 100 things they've ranked that are climate interventions that are things we are doing right now this minute that are improving our chances against climate change. And all of them need to be scaled and increased, but it is really incredible. We tend to think of solar and wind and electric cars, and our list kind of goes, well, what else? But the list is vast, and it includes things like that we don't think about, but better refrigerant management, new refrigerants. That's the biggest single impact we'll have is on the better refrigerant management. Another thing on the list that no one is ever thinking about, but it's using coal ash in the production of cement. It makes the cement cheaper and better, and it allows us to sequester carbon into the cement. So, I mean, there are all these things that are completely off our radar that we don't even think about that are going on. And yeah, you and I don't have to worry about putting coal ash in cement. But, we can think about, what we drive, what we eat. Mm-hmm. Food waste is the number 2 contributor to, number 2 opportunity for us to reverse climate change is reducing food waste. Most of us are not thinking about that. So there are these huge opportunities in all these areas for us to improve. I just couldn't be more excited about the future. I really do think 2045 we'll be living in a world with no extreme poverty, none, by any reasonable measure. We will be living in a world with radically improved health, radically improved longevity, radically improved infant mortality around the world. We will be living in a world where, yes, we understand the concepts of climate change, but it will not dominate our discussion. Yes, we'll all be driving electric cars, and it will be wonderful. But we won't be thinking about climate change nearly like we do now, because we will have come over the hump. We will be in the process of reversing the horrible effects of climate change by 2045.
Well, again, optimism never hurt nobody. And I really appreciate your work in being so truthful and so transparent, and also connecting real accessible things that allow us to maintain and access our optimism. So thank you for that. I'm curious, in your work, in your life, personal or professional, my 2 favorite questions. Mm-hmm. So first one is, what have you changed your mind about lately?
Oh, golly. I think a lot of us have changed our minds about Facebook. And I'm certainly one. I'm still on Facebook. I haven't abandoned. And part of the reason is I think Facebook is making a real effort. But there is growing evidence that, in my mind, that Facebook, in an effort to keep us on the site, made a point to show us things that made us angry, to make us angry at our friends, to make us angry at people who didn't think the way we think, didn't believe the way we believed. And I think that has created schisms in society over the 12 years we've been using Facebook that are going to take another 12 years to reverse. And I hope Facebook will choose to be part of that solution.
Devin, hold on 1 second. The internet cut out pretty significantly in your Facebook answer. So I'm drawing a big X. Matt, we're going to cut this out and start over.
Okay.
Your answer is super important. So I'm just going to ask the question again and then do it. This hasn't really happened before, but like it was frozen, no sound, and then it picked you right back up, but way later.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. You get another chance. So we'll just start at the beginning of the question.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I was like, yes, I totally agree. Oh, where'd you go? Okay. So, what have you changed your mind about lately?
I guess it's Facebook. I was an early adopter, not the earliest, of course. I was not in college at the time it was released. I'd been out for a few weeks. But I loved Facebook. And I think I loved Facebook through the 2016 election and didn't see how Facebook was manipulating me as I was fighting with all of my friends over politics. Mm-hmm. And looking back, I really am convinced by the voices who are saying Facebook did that intentionally. Mm-hmm. They manipulated us into fighting with our friends in order to get us to stay on the platform longer. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anyone at Facebook did this with malice. I don't think they thought we're screwing up society. I think they thought, this is great. We figured out a way to keep people on the site longer. If we show them content that makes them mad, they engage more and stay on the site more. And I may be misconstruing what actually happened, but that's certainly, I think, a fairly reasonable construct of how we experienced it. Mm-hmm. I do think that Facebook is changing. I don't feel like they point me to hostile content as much. I also think human beings are learning to be less hostile on Facebook. And so I think it's better, but I think there are some messed up things on social media. And so I think the counsel to be cautious, careful users and to restrict the amount of time we spend there is important. And I think what you're doing here is a great example of something good. It's to get people connecting face to face. This may be virtual, but you and I are having a genuine bona fide conversation. Mm-hmm. And that is so incredibly important. We don't do that on Facebook. We don't do that by email. We really do need to be getting together and slapping backs and shaking hands and having face-to-face conversations more. So my view on that has changed in recent weeks, even as my thoughts have gelled and matured as I've been reading up on this.
That's a wonderful insight. And I think what's important to clarify, or at least what I kind of say in my own work, right, is that we always talk about wanting to have an authentic conversation. Mm-hmm. Well, you're having an authentic conversation when you're mad it's being interrupted. And what, in my context of understanding Facebook or social media, is that it's about the constant interruption. So you can't get a conversation going, but it is certainly thought-provoking.
Yeah.
Right? So the more thought-provoking pokers that you can get going, the less authentic of a conversation we're having. So you and I virtually are having a conversation. It is very thought-provoking for both you and me. And to share that, it is possible that it will become thought-provoking and also lead to further conversations, right? So not to get into the slippery slope around freedom of expression or what First Amendment rights are, but the idea that words lead to more words is a significantly undervalued piece, I think, of how we're doing democracy. And when social media and democracy are showing up in the same paragraph, it's not just the thought-provoking, it's the actual connecting and feeling responsible for what I'm contributing and responsible for holding what you're contributing and then generating more thoughts to share with more people that leads to more words. That is an authentic conversation, and you can do it not in person, but you have to do it without distraction.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
That's great. What do you absolutely know?
Boy. I guess over the last 12 years or so, I find myself trying to be consciously open-minded. And so some of the things that I thought I knew, I don't say I know anymore. I'm pretty sure about gravity. I'm pretty sure the sun will come up tomorrow. It has every day I've been alive, so I kind of think it'll make it tomorrow. But yeah, I'm sure there are things that I would say I absolutely know, but I try so hard to be open-minded, to see both sides of issues. I've even, I am a deeply liberal person, philosophically and politically. But I find myself trying so hard to understand and appreciate other positions and viewpoints. I recently read a book, Cliff Sims' book. It was, what was it? Team of Vipers, I think he called it, about his experience in the Trump White House. And, with a title like Team of Vipers, I really expected it to be more of a critique. And he critiqued his teammates, and he critiqued himself in that sort of thoughtful but friendly way. But in the end, he seemed to persist in almost a reverence for Donald Trump. And it was interesting to read that book. I loved the book. I really did. It was so fascinating to read his take.
Wow.
He did not convince me. I did not come away believing what he believes about Donald Trump. But I'm so glad that I subjected myself to his view of Donald Trump. And, for anyone who's interested in the book, it almost exactly parallels the chronological story told by Bob Woodward in the book Fear. And so I really would recommend to people that you read both books. And Sims wrote his book last, and so he has a little critique of Woodward's book in there, but on many points, he's essentially confirming the same narrative, which is interesting to hear, two viewpoints of the same story that actually mesh in many ways. So it was fascinating reading. A long way of my saying I try to be open-minded, and that's an example of how I really felt like I benefited from trying to be a little bit more open-minded.
It's interesting. I am about halfway through Fear, and as much as I'm enjoying the book, I really am burning out on the liberal critique of what is going on, which interestingly, I also have reached about poverty, health, global climate change. Yeah, I know, it's real bad. That just makes me want to eat a sandwich.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you first said Team of Vipers, I hadn't heard of that book. It is now on the list. But what's interesting is the word viper created such a sense of fear in me, right? But what I'm hearing from you is that if this thing, then this side of it and this side of it are both valid to understand. I did a keynote last week where the client came up as someone was talking to me. And as someone was talking to me, they identified as a Trump supporter and asked if they could give me a compliment. And I was like, first off, Trump needs all the support in the world, as does any US president, because that is a job I don't want. Yeah. And of course you can give me a compliment. Who doesn't have time for a compliment? And we were able to engage in a conversation. So like on stage, I usually make a joke about, as Glenn Beck would call me, I am a pinko commie liberal. And maybe to the left of that, actually. So he didn't know that he could engage with me, right? So then now we know how other people identify us. So then going back to that authentic conversation, what does that identity mean to you, right? So then he was able to talk about how one of the things I talk about is that it's all of our responsibility to question our beliefs. And whatever that belief is, I don't care what it is, but you need to know why you believe it. And the only way to know why you believe it is if it survives your rigorous, not someone else's, but your rigorous questioning process. You're just going to believe in it that much stronger, but you can be able to explain it to someone else. And if it doesn't survive, now you know what you do believe in, like that's our responsibility. Anyway, that is wonderful. I feel like I could talk to you for a month straight through, as long as we had sandwich breaks. But it is time for the lightning round.
Okay.
Boom. Okay. So you chose 3 numbers from my icebreaker cards, 13, 14, and 15. All are on the easy level. Number 13, quickly, lightning round, is what is the story behind your name, be it legal, preferred, or a nickname?
My given name is Devin. It's spelled Devin, but I was named after the town in England, Devon, Devon. But my mom was afraid that I would be called Devon if she spelled it Devon, which is correct. But I'm spelled Devin, spelled like Kevin.
Nice. Great. Number 14, what was your first pet or the first pet you knew? Name, type, breed, personality traits, etc.
I think the first pet I remember having was a little garter snake that I collected out on a walk with my dad. And the water snake or the garter snake quickly became ill. That became apparent to us, like within 72 hours. He was not happy, which is not a surprise in hindsight, this poor creature. So I think we returned and released him to the wild. I hope he recovered. Gotcha. That was my first experience with a pet. I was 5.
Excellent. That's a good one. Number 15, what is your go-to comfort food when you're feeling celebratory?
My wife and I have a guilty pleasure that we are almost ashamed of. We eat a vegan diet and are really quite committed to that. But we found in Utah, there is a chain of old Taco Bell competitors called Taco Time. Mm-hmm. They sell a delicious and healthy, relatively speaking, veggie burrito. We eat that all the time. But we have picked up the bad habit of eating the Mexi fries, which are just tater tots that come with them. And it's really bad because, if there's something to celebrate, it's taco time. If I'm sad or upset, I need to go get taco time. So there's almost always a really good excuse to go to taco time. And it's embarrassing because no one in Utah thinks this is where you go for good food.
But for the record, there's always time.
There's always time.
Yeah.
So now,
I
deep confessions right there.
yeah, I dedicate a lot of my life and reference points in my book to tater tots. So
Okay.
I'm with you on this. And to give equal advertisement for this not official sponsorship, Taco Bell is about to release a vegan menu.
Yes, actually, Taco Bell is really very good
Mhm.
about vegan food. There are lots of vegan things, and it's easy to get many of their items in a vegan form. It's great. I'm excited. I'm excited to learn that they're going to advance that. But that's great. They're actually quite a kudos to Taco Bell.
Who knew? Right.
Who knew? That's right.
All right. Well, if people would like to hear more about your preference of tater tots or possibly get in touch with you to do work with you, how would people get in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is to visit my website, devinthorpe.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being with us and for doing what you do. And please keep doing what you do. And as I like to say to the folks that like inspire me when there are days where I'm like, I need to clock out and hang up my towel and not. I know people like you are out there doing the work. And the days that I'm super on fire, I'm hoping it's a day that you've been able to take some time for yourself. So thank you for what you do. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. You're so kind, Jess. It's such an honor to be included in your work. And I was so flattered that you wanted to include me and so grateful that you would. Thank you, thank you, thank you.